Every night before climbing into bed, Helen puts on a pair of thick wool socks. She retired from teaching, spends her days gardening, and is generally in good spirits. But as soon as the lights go out, a familiar coldness creeps into her toes. Even under a heavy down comforter, in a room heated to 70 degrees, her feet remain cold. She has layered blankets and tried thermal footwear, yet her feet remain icy to the touch. Helen assumes it is a normal part of getting older. There is a detail Helen has never considered. Her husband often complains when her right foot brushes against his leg, calling it icy. Her left foot, however, feels normal. Helen ignores this asymmetry. She assumes it is just a personal quirk of her body. Most people believe that cold feet at night are simply a localized issue caused by the room temperature or aging blood vessel. They assume that if they add another layer of socks or wrap their feet in blankets, they will eventually warm up. The clinical reality is that persistent cold feet, especially when one foot is colder than the other, are not a harmless response to the cold. They are an objective warning sign of a physical drop in circulation. To continue learning with our regular evidence-based health documentaries, please subscribe to Truewell Prime. If you have experienced cold feet or circulation changes, share your story in the comments. Your experience might help another viewer. And please consider sharing this video with a spouse, parent, or loved one who may benefit. Inside your cardiovascular system, warm blood is constantly pumped to your skin through a vast network of tiny blood vessels called the cutaneous microcirculation. Cutaneous thermoregulation is how your body maintains its core temperature. Exposure to cold triggers your sympathetic nervous system. It instructs these tiny vessels to constrict, reducing blood flow to your extremities to keep your core organs warm. However, in Helen's legs, this process is not normal. Plaque narrowing has built up inside her artery. This mechanical blockage impairs cutaneous blood flow and heat transfer to the skin of her toes. Because her right leg has more significant narrowing than her left, her right foot is chronically colder. This temperature asymmetry is not a quirk. It is the direct physical footprint of localized arterial obstruction. If this reduction in blood flow is ignored, the consequence is not just cold toes. When cutaneous blood flow is continuously restricted, the skin and tissue of the foot are slowly starved of oxygen and nutrients. This makes the tissue fragile, meaning that even a minor friction rub from a shoe can lead to skin breakdown that your body cannot easily repair. This is why wearing multiple tight layers of socks, as Helen does, is actually counterproductive. The elastic bands of tight socks compress the cutaneous microvessels even further, reducing the already compromised blood flow. Vascular guidelines from the American Heart Association state that persistent, asymmetrical leg temperatures are reliable indicators of arterial insufficiency. The Society for Vascular Surgery confirms this objective finding. These studies confirm that subclinical arterial blockages in the legs are strongly associated with widespread plaque buildup throughout the cardiovascular system. The immediate step for Helen is to stop layering tight, constrictive socks that compress her blood vessels. Instead, she should choose loose-fitting, non-binding thermal socks designed for circulation. She must also schedule an appointment to have the pulses in her feet checked. Helen has spent 3 years treating her cold feet as a simple nuisance. Now that she understands the vascular mechanisms of impaired cutaneous flow and arterial asymmetry, she must ask herself a new question. If her right foot is being starved of warmth by narrowed pathways, what is happening to the rest of her body? Every morning when Helen gets out of bed, she performs a new habit. She sits on the edge of the mattress and carefully checks her feet. They still feel cool to the touch, but they are quiet. There is no buzzing, no tingling, and no pain. She is relieved because she has recently learned about a patient named Gary, whose experience was entirely different. Gary is 58, a retired accountant who has lived with type 2 diabetes for a decade. For the past year, Gary has lain awake at night rubbing his discolored feet. To his brain, they do not just feel cold, they feel hot, tingling, and bubbly like soda water. He assumes this fizzy sensation is simple fatigue from standing all day. He normalizes it, rubbing his toes in the dark, hoping the strange fizzing will subside. The clinical warning is that Gary's bubbly sensation is not a sign of tired muscles. It is a sign of nerve death. When sensory nerves are damaged, they do not always go silent immediately. Instead, They misfire, generating false signals of burning, pins and needles, or icy coldness. Because Gary cannot feel normal sensations, he has recently missed a small cut on the side of his big toe from a new pair of shoes. He did not feel it bleed. He did not feel it rub. The lack of pain is not a sign of healing. It is a severe clinical danger that leaves him at high risk for a non-healing foot ulcer or infection. This nerve damage is called peripheral neuropathy. The biological mechanism begins with chronic blood glucose elevation. Over time, high sugar levels damage the tiny microvessels that supply oxygen and nutrients to your peripheral nerves. Starved of blood, the long sensory nerve fibers in your feet undergo axonal demyelination, meaning they lose the fatty myelin sheath that insulates them. Without insulation, the electrical signals leak and crosswire, sending false messages of burning, freezing, or fizzing to your spinal cord and brain. Your brain registers Gary's feet as freezing cold, even though they are physically warm to a thermometer. Because the microvascular damage impairs both the nerves and the circulation needed for tissue repair, Gary's body cannot heal the tiny cut on his toe. Fortunately, peripheral neuropathy is not a one-way street. The nervous and vascular systems possess a remarkable capacity to recover when the metabolic environment is stabilized. By improving blood sugar management and adopting a simple daily foot inspection, Gary can prevent minor skin breaches from developing into deep, limb-threatening ulcers. Using a simple hand mirror to inspect the soles of the feet daily allows patients to visually catch cuts before they become infected. With optimal glucose control, the microcirculation can stabilize, halting nerve demyelination and protecting the remaining sensory fibers. Helen, sitting on her bed, does not feel Gary's fizzing nerves, but she realizes that checking her feet visually is just as important as keeping them warm. There is a subtle walking signal that many older adults experience, but rarely report to their doctor. They notice a tightness, ache, or cramp in their calves that flares up after walking a short distance or climbing a flight of stairs. They assume it is just their joints, or perhaps their muscles getting tired with age. They sit down for a few minutes, the pain subsides, and they continue. The clinical warning is that this cramping is not joint fatigue. It is a sign of oxygen starvation in your muscles, and it is directly connected to the pathways that warm your toes. Helen has noticed this recently. Whenever she carries groceries up the stairs to her house, she has to stop halfway to catch her breath and let a heavy tightness in her calves fade. She blames her knees. She blames her 70-year-old body. But her experience is the early whisper of the same condition that affects Arthur. Arthur is 72, a retired contractor and a former smoker. Arthur can no longer walk more than half a block down his street before a severe, burning cramp in his calves forces him to halt. He sits on a park bench, waits 5 minutes for the tightness to release, and then walks another half block. Arthur's pain is called claudication. The biological mechanism is driven by atherosclerosis, the progressive buildup of fatty cholesterol plaque inside the leg arteries. In a healthy leg, the arteries dilate to deliver a surge of oxygen-rich blood to the calf muscles during exercise. In Arthur's legs, however, plaque narrowing has rigidified and narrowed the vascular lumen. The arterial supply cannot meet the muscular demand. Starved of oxygen, the calf muscles convert to anaerobic metabolism, producing lactic acid that triggers a painful cramp. Because the circulation is chronically reduced, the surrounding tissues suffer, causing the hair follicles on his lower legs to die and leaving his shins looking shiny and hairless. If this arterial blockage is ignored, the vascular decay does not remain in the calves. Over months, the narrowing progresses. What began as pain during walking becomes rest pain, a constant, throbbing ache in the feet even when lying flat in bed. To find relief, patients begin dangling their legs over the side of the bed to let gravity pull blood down. Eventually, the tissues starve completely, turning minor sores into non-healing wounds that carry a high risk of tissue death and eventual amputation. Crucially, plaque does not build up in the legs alone. Narrowed leg arteries mean the same plaque cascade is active in vessels supplying your brain and heart. This dramatically raises your risk of heart attack or stroke. The immediate step for Arthur and Helen is to seek a vascular evaluation. They must have the pulses in their legs and feet palpated by a clinician. Arthur must also enroll in a supervised walking program, which paradoxically helps stimulate the growth of small helper blood vessels to bypass the blockages over time. Helen must stop blaming her joints for her calf fatigue. She has spent years treating her body's warning signs as normal aging. Now, she must face the reality of where these narrowed pathways lead. Helen sat in her doctor's office, clutching a pamphlet on arterial health. She was anxious. Her physician had proposed a vascular evaluation, but Helen believed her heart was perfectly fine because she had never experienced chest pain or shortness of breath. She was hesitant to undergo tests, assuming that if there were a serious cardiovascular issue, her body would have warned her with a dramatic symptom near her chest. The clinical reality is that widespread arterial disease, or atherosclerosis, develops silently. Serious blockages in the coronary arteries can progress for decades without causing any chest pain. Relying on chest pain as your only heart warning is a dangerous misconception. Often, the earliest sign of cardiovascular disease is not in your chest at all. It is in the temperature of your feet. Vascular guidelines in the European Heart Journal confirm a key link. Plaque buildup in the extremities is a direct proxy for plaque in the coronary artery. Large-scale screenings show that patients with silent peripheral artery disease face a higher risk of heart attack. This risk remains high, even without any chest discomfort. The vascular system is a continuous network. A blockage in the leg is a warning for the brain and the heart. This connection is driven by how the heart manages systemic circulation. The biological mechanism begins with cardiac output, the amount of blood your heart pumps out each minute. When the heart's pumping efficiency is reduced, or when systemic pressure drops, the brain registers the change. To protect your life, your autonomic nervous system triggers sympathetic vasoconstriction, tightening the blood vessels in your skin, hands, and feet. By narrowing these peripheral pathways, your body shunts warm blood away from your toes and directs it toward your brain and heart. Consequently, cold feet at night are not just a local leg problem. They can be a direct physical reflection of your heart's pumping capacity. When the heart is forced to conserve resources, your toes are the first to feel the chill. To resolve Helen's anxiety, her doctor explained that the proposed evaluation was not a complex surgery. It was a simple, non-invasive test called the ankle brachial index, or ABI. During an ABI, a clinician uses blood pressure cuffs and an ultrasound device. They compare the systolic pressure in your ankle to the pressure in your arm. The test is painless and takes only 10 minutes. An ABI value below 0.90 confirms the presence of arterial narrowing. If a blockage is found, the recovery path is clear. Under supervised medical care, lifestyle adjustments, lipid-lowering therapies, and structured walking programs can halt plaque progression, improve microcirculation, and restore warmth to the toes. Helen took a deep breath, removed her wool socks, and agreed to the test. She was ready to stop hiding her cold feet and start protecting her heart. Helen came into this believing that a drawer full of wool socks and a stack of blankets were the only answers she needed for her cold feet. She leaves it with a different map of her own vascular system. The chill in her toes was not a minor annoyance of aging. It was the warning signal of a heart conserving its resources. The asymmetry between her left and right foot was a physical footprint of localized arterial narrowing. The mild fatigue she felt on the stairs was not her knee joints wearing down, but her leg muscles whispering for oxygen. By looking beyond the simple symptoms, Helen was able to catch a silent cardiovascular warning before it became a crisis. Every one of these arterial pathways can be protected. The difference between neuropathy and vascular blockage is a distinction that can be verified in a single clinical visit. A silent wound can be prevented with a simple, daily visual inspection. The ankle brachial index is a 10-minute, non-invasive test that compares systolic pressure in the arm and ankle, providing an immediate snapshot of peripheral arterial health. And once a blockage is identified, the response is clear. Supervised walking programs, lipid-lowering therapies, and lifestyle adjustments can halt the progression of plaque, improve microcirculation, and restore vital warmth to the extremities. If your feet are persistently cold even in a warm room, do not ignore them. Check for temperature differences between your left and right foot. If you have diabetes, Establish a daily routine of inspecting the soles of your feet for silent cuts or blisters. Your nerves may not warn you of an injury, but your eyes can. If you experience cramping or deep fatigue in your calves when walking short distances, bring it to your physician's attention. And if your doctor suggests a vascular check, ask about an ABI. Helen took off her wool socks, lay back on the examination table, and let the pressure cuffs do their work. She stopped hiding the chill in her toes and started protecting the pump that keeps her whole body alive. Truewell Prime is for educational and entertainment purposes only. The scientific concepts discussed here should not be taken as medical advice. Always consult a physician before changing your medication or health regimen.